The evolution of India's startup landscape has been speculative, rising as it did from a nascent promise to become the world's third largest in less than 2 decades. In the next panel discussion, speakers will discuss start investors, the bets they are making for 2021. I would like to invite Varun Varma, VP Investment Operations, Lightbox Ventures, to moderate this discussion. Joining me are the panel of experts Sateesh Andra, MD, Endiya Partners, Sunitha Viswanathan, VP Unitus Ventures, Arshad Sayyad, Head Fidelity Investments India Division. Over to you, Mr. Varma.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's panel. Before I start, I'd like to begin by thanking the Economic Times HR World for organizing this panel today. I'd also like to thank Sunitha, Sateesh, and Arshad for participating in this panel. The topic for today's panel is startup investors and the bets they're making in 2021, in line with the theme of the summit, I guess, and specifically to the HR tech industry. Before I jump into the questions, I thought I'd start by setting a bit of context around our discussion today. In the past year, there has been about $110 million of venture capital money that's been invested in the HR tech space. Today on the panel, we have some of the most active investors in the space that have invested in startups that are probably considered the preeminent startups in their space. And these startups range from SaaS platforms like Darwinbox to more consumer-focused recruitment platforms like Better Place, as well as staffing agencies like Gigforce. In many ways, HR tech was one of the first subsectors within the broader technology landscape in India to see breakout success, and it was in the form of Naukri.com. InfoEdge, which is Naukri.com's parent company, is today India's one of the first few companies to actually go public from the technology space. So obviously they achieved the milestone of profitability, which is, I guess, a long shot for a lot of companies today. But today they are the largest publicly listed technology company with a market cap of close to $6 billion. So we have seen lots of success in this space already, setting the precedent for many of the startups today. Moving on, I think when you think about companies within the space, we can broadly classify them into one of three categories, right? You can classify them as talent acquisition, talent operations, or talent management, right? Talent acquisition is companies that are basically startups that help companies and enterprises recruit staff, and these can range from more gig force oriented staff to more longer term staff. Then obviously talent operations, which is like onboarding, salary management, and the more the dirty work, so to speak, of what happens within the HR space, or not the glamorous side of it. And finally, talent management, right? This could range from employee engagement to employee wellness, so on and so forth. So as you can imagine, technology has disrupted many industries, and the HR industry is no different. On the one hand, we are witnessing the emergence of SaaS platforms that are streamlining talent operations, right? So, typically people traditionally people had been doing a lot of this stuff on Excel, and it was all over the place. We today have SaaS platforms that are streamlining a lot of these workflows. And on the consumer focus side, we're seeing platforms that are either creating social networks, almost like LinkedIn, a version of LinkedIn, or gamified recruitment platforms that are going after blue and gray collar employees and helping them get placed, which is kind of critical, especially in our country where labor force participation is really low, especially in the organized sector. Today, through our conversation, we will try and cover different aspects of the HR industry, and these will range from emerging trends, the impact of some policies that we're seeing happening in India, the impact of COVID-19. As you can imagine, it's obviously changing the way we work, which is creating lots of opportunities for HR companies specifically. And finally, we'll also get a perspective from an enterprise looking inside out on where within the HR stack are opportunities for companies to come in and take advantage of. So let's jump in. I'll start with Sateesh. Welcome, Sateesh. So I guess I'll start with the most obvious question that people would have at this point in time. We're I guess hopefully at the tail end of COVID-19 with vaccinations being rolled out recently. And like every sector is asking, I guess it's particularly pertinent to the HR tech industry. What, in your views, are the impact of COVID-19, and what opportunities do you see emerging as a result of COVID-19 that startups can take advantage of?
Thanks, Varun, and thanks to Economic Times HR World for having me on this panel. Hello to my fellow panelists, Sunitha and Arshad. Well, in terms of like many other sectors, I think HR tech also started out more with a neutral outlook immediately after kind of COVID onset. The way I look at it is the world was in a panic mode, COVID discovered and everything was shut down, to obviously in terms of whether the curve is growing or flattened, but the world kind of resumed its operations. We're in that mode and we're almost close to getting back to normalcy with both repurposed drugs and vaccines out there. Now you see more tailwinds. And I think the digital workplace has become kind of a reality, and remote work is something that no one can shy away from. And when you have a distributed workforce, fundamentally, how do you manage that workforce? You talked about, talent hiring, talent operations, and talent management. That's the entire life cycle, hire to retire kind of a life cycle. How do you manage, this distributed talent? So that has become very, very important. And even more important, the other is, perspectives that if you were operating within a premise or on a campus, you didn't care too much about, because they were all complementary and adjacent, but today they become very important and probably move closer to the core. How about the well-being of your employees? That becomes extremely important, both financial well-being and then, health and mental well-being of your employees also become kind of very important. So I think the digital transformation has been accelerated because of the pandemic. The move, to embrace, these kinds of technologies or HR tech from mid-market perspective, again, has been accelerated. So as India kind of moves towards this 5 trillion economy, human capital management becomes the most important topic for many companies that are going to be leaders and that are going to catch up with the leaders in their respective verticals. These are, some of the things and opportunities that we see for entrepreneurs, in the coming years.
Thank you for that, Sateesh. So I guess, Arshad, I'll throw this to you. So, I gave Sateesh gave the outside-in view of what COVID-19 opportunities it's creating. I guess, as someone who runs a large organization with a global workforce as well, I think from an inside-out perspective, as you think about how the workforce is getting reorganized, where do you see within the HR stack, I guess, opportunities that could help simplify operations, given the new realities that are emerging post-COVID?
Thank you very much, Varun, and thanks to Economic Times HR World for having us here on the panel. I'm really glad to be there with Sateesh and Sunitha here as well. That's a very good question, Varun. What I would say is this is once in a lifetime opportunity. The pandemic has actually served up for the HR fraternity and all the technology companies looking at the HR dimension of organization. There is a significant disruption that is emerging, and that will continue for the next few years as we settle into a new hybrid model like Sateesh talked about. There is no question in anybody's doubt that the old ways of being anchored to an office are gone away, and there is going to be a new form of collaboration, engagement, community that's going to emerge within enterprises. From a large enterprise perspective, we see there are 3 big dimensions around which there will be a significant amount of technology alignment. In my own opinion, I call it the 3 S's, right? The first one is the self, right? For an associate or an employee, all the technology enablements that are required to make that associate successful, whether they're at home, they're at a workplace, they're at a hometown, anywhere in the world, work from anywhere, but what is everything that's required from a technology enablement? There are many white spaces that are there that I think we can, address, the startup community can address from an enablement perspective. And that window is open for about the next 2 years because enterprises like ours are looking for a lot of enablement technology. The second dimension is what I call the sync dimension, right? An associate needs to have me time, heads down time, focused on their work, but then they need to sync back with their individual teams, their units. That's where the collaboration quotient is fairly significant. How do you work in a remote environment but still have breakouts, you still have whiteboarding, you still have innovation, you still have those virtual run-ins to the others. So I think the second dimension is the sync dimension, and there is a significant, again, set of opportunities for startups to look at the sync dimension. And then the third dimension, what I call is the serve dimension. You serve a bigger, larger organization, a bigger purpose, a bigger community. You might be global, maybe in 200 countries or maybe in 2 countries. And you got to be a part of that larger ecosystem. And how do you enable that? How do you bring in and do your traditional town halls where hundreds of people would come in physically, but now you got to do it virtually, but still have the engagement quotient? That's just one example of opportunities that are emerging. And I think everybody has to pivot very differently because technology is going to be the underlying pillar. So we are looking at it from a self-sync and a serve perspective. And there are enough opportunities in that space for startups to go after, Varun.
That's awesome. That's quite encouraging, honestly. I guess, Sunitha, I'll shift to you, right? And I guess maybe I'll start with the regulation side of it, because while COVID is creating whatever it is and the tailwinds that emerge for it for HR companies, I think there's a great deal of activity happening from the government perspective also, right? There's recently talk about them trying to reorganize the labor laws. So I'd love to get your perspective on, what do you make of what's happening? How quickly do you think that happens, and what impact does that create further for HR companies as well?
Thanks, Varun, and thanks for setting great context to this wonderful event. Thank you, Economic Times, and it's great to be on a panel with both Arshad and Sateesh. So I think it's been a long time coming. We've been, and COVID has probably brought the issue of labor issues to the forefront. And in line with that, the 3 labor codes that were passed last year, and in addition to the one that came in 2019, there are a lot of path-breaking regulations that was meant to keep in mind that the workforce of tomorrow is very different from what it is today, and to make the job for the employer a lot more easier. So the labor code regulations has now recognized finally that there is a gig employee. You need to define who a gig employee is, because that's fundamentally different from how we've traditionally taught an employer-employee relationship. Recognizing that social security is critical for gig employees, platform workers, is another great step that the Code on Social Security ensures has brought into picture. So ensuring that employers are keeping in mind that social security or a social network has to be created for these for giggers is something that we see is a great opportunity for startups to play in. Subsequently, there are other regulations around the fact that women workers were previously prevented or prohibited from working at odd hours or in certain types of factories and certain types of industries. However, now that choice is left to the individual, because you now need to provide a social network for her to be able to come and work. And considering that India probably has been tragically seeing a drop in women participation in the labor workforce, this is a good step that's been taken. The devil obviously is in the details. It's how enterprises, how startups are going to come together and then execute on these new labor reforms. That's going to be critical. It's also interesting to see that in terms of micro insurance, I think this is a great way to also have it introduced, because now the labor codes actually ensure that insurance needs to be provided to the deepest corners of the country. So people are going to obviously take notice and start providing that. And startups will play a critical role over there. The large behemoths may not be able to do it directly. So it'll be, again, a great alliance between some of the established players with startups finding a niche over there.
Thank you, Sunitha. That was super interesting, I guess. And we hope that, unlike we're seeing with the farm bills, I guess that something really moves there. But just following on from that, right? I think you obviously work at Unitus, and you all are more impact oriented, right? And you all have done a bunch of activity or made a bunch of investments in startups that are focused more on the blue and gray collar side of the world, right? Especially from an acquisition standpoint. Maybe you can talk about a little about why that particular sub segment, and how do you think of opportunities there?
Sure. I think the reason why we're going after blue and gray collar workers. One, the market is large. We're talking about the entire Bharat, as it's now popularly called, 400 million people. But sadly, just 150 million of them are organized blue collar workforces. So that's how the disparity is currently. And there are people who are focused after white collar transformation. But the fact of the matter is, even the most basic issues that a blue collar worker faces is not getting solved today with the solutions available in the market, right from hiring. So obviously blue and gray collar worker is completely mass hiring versus say for white collar where it is skill based hiring. Blue collar worker gets paid based on the number of hours he clocks, versus for a white collar it's completely output driven. For a blue collar worker, it's highly driven by attendance. Like if you don't clock in, you don't come in, versus for a white collar, it's performance based management. You need to have vernacular. You cannot go in with an English first approach, or even Hindi for that matter. That's not going to work in the South. So a vernacular approach is very critical for blue collar workers. And these are just, I'm just scratching the surface by quoting a few of these examples where the differentiation is so stark that solutions that are out there in the market will not work for blue and gray collar worker. And that was the thesis that we kind of built on, that we need India and Bharat specific solutions that can then go and probably work across the world in terms of other developing nations. But let's build for Bharat, let's solve problems that are imminent and that need to be catered to at this point of time for the blue and the gray collar worker.
Hey, Varun, can I add another point to that? I think Sunitha made a brilliant point. I think there is another workforce that I call them the invisible workforce, right? We have almost about 30 million citizens who are facing some kind of disability in the country, and they are actually employable, but there is no set of regulation, enablement, support, and frankly, no technology enablement. I mean, right now we're starting to see some good assistive tech foundries and accelerators and startups coming up. But honestly, that's also a workforce that I think can be very productive for our country and our $5 trillion vision. But I think we need to do more on those segments as well.
Thank you for that. I guess, Sateesh, I'll quickly jump to you since we're on the topic of investments, right? Y'all are more technology first, I guess, technology oriented. And I guess by that, I mean more SaaS type of investments, especially in the HR tech space. And one of them is obviously a company called Darwinbox, which recently raised a large round of funding from Salesforce. So maybe, I guess the question I'm asking is, what attracts you to the SaaS space in particular? What do you look for? And maybe you could even talk a little bit about what your thesis was when you invested in Darwinbox specifically.
Sure. So when we really look at, I think our fundamental belief that human capital is the most precious capital. As a venture capitalist, not many a time people acknowledge that. They think that, or they push saying that, capital is as important as human capital. But we firmly believe that human capital is the most precious. Rest is all commodity. And we knew that, whether it's 5 trillion or 4 trillion, whether it happens in 5 years or, 7 years, it doesn't matter. For companies to grow and kind of become category leaders and market leaders, you need to manage your human capital. And only when you deliver on that promise, you would be able to build a very viable enterprise. So that was the first. The second thing is we strongly believe, that HR is not going to be another module from a ERP vendor like SAP or Oracle. Yes, I mean, they've had all the finance data, then other kind of workflows. Initially, HR meant that leave attendance, payroll, and compliance. There was independent islands in terms of learning and development, performance management, recruitment. But we strongly believe that, HR would evolve on its own, and obviously all these functions, to implement the hire to retire life cycle, one way to look at it, or Arshad's definition of self-sync and serve, is another very interesting way to look at it, or talent, obviously onboarding, operations, and management. So we strongly felt that this is going to grow on its own. It's not just going to be another module within an ERP. Now, when you really look at opportunity within India and Southeast Asia, we're very firm believers that India has done extremely well in IT services, kind of better, faster, cheaper value proposition. India has done exceptionally well, in consumer and internet economies. We strongly believe that Indian entrepreneurs will build products, not just for India, but also regional, and some of them maybe even global. So that was the third, piece where we said there will be entrepreneurs, and to be able to build these applications, and already there are incumbents. We all know that there's SAP or there's Oracle or there's Workday. They would not be able to solve for the local context. To be able to go and deliver, a SaaS platform or a platform with all the feature sets. I think Sunitha talked about, or even Arshad mentioned, how important is it to integrate, the blue collar, white collar, as well as the gray collar community. And it's very important. And we are largely a mobile first society, right? So given all these kinds of requirements, we knew that the global players, this would not be a priority. It's not that they're not capable of solving, but this would be, kind of on a lesser priority list from their perspective. And then the fourth thing, if you really look at, I think the technology. I mean, you look at AI, you look at RPA, you look at data science, you look at all of these kind of coming together, at that confluence, you're going to see disruptive stuff that's going to happen, within the HR world. So that's why we felt that absolutely, you would require, many startups, and there will be leaders built in this space. Darwinbox, I think the team, when we made that first bet, we were one of the first investors actually in Darwinbox. We really loved the team and their understanding of the domain. And the founding team, Chaitanya, Rohit, Jayant, they understood the process really, really well. It was not so much theoretical, because when you go into the HR world, you need to have some domain expertise. You need to understand the customer pain before you can really, deliver a solution, whether it's in the form of software or a service, does not matter. So they knew the domain, they had complementary skills, and they had tremendous amount of clarity. And we felt that, they're the right team that would, obviously go places. The idea there was, primarily you go after mid-market, upper mid-market, but then we knew that very clearly, the innovator's dilemma will prevail, and then eventually you will get the enterprises. And then you've got ability to go into the other regions. Today, I kind of see many, many more opportunities opening up around, the self, sync, and serve. Certainly applying all of these technologies, whether it is AI or whether it is, chatbots, or whether it is, insights-driven performance management, learning and development, recruitment. I think every area is up for disruption.
Arshad, I'll actually take that thought to you, because Sateesh spoke about the fact that technology is disrupting several elements of the workplace, right? And there's this whole conversation around future of work. Will it become more? Will companies become leaner? You'll have more obviously technology. So and then there's the gig economy or the freelance economy that's working, and there are several emerging, and there are several platforms that are being built to address to take advantage of that opportunity as well. I'd love to get, again, as someone who leads a larger organization, your perspective on, how do you see the workplace? What would it look like 5 to 10 years from today? And given that these changes are happening, I guess parallel changes, so to speak, how do companies think about then managing culture and employee wellness, and do you see opportunities emerging from that for startups as well?
Yeah, Varun, that's an interesting question. I don't think anybody knows the answer, and frankly, it will be hard for me to say I know the answer. We can only guess where we are going. A couple of things are for sure. I think in a crisis like the pandemic, we have seen always people tend to overestimate the impact right out of the crisis and underestimate the long-term impact of it. So I think in the short term, there'll be some adjustments, there'll be some hybrid models emerging, but long-term, there is definitely going to be a big shift. Based on my, conversations with many heads of businesses across India as well, and I'll keep it very specific to India. And especially within that, I will keep it very specific to the white collar workers in the technology and the operation spaces, because, just like Sunitha is much more probably an expert in the blue collar area. What is going to happen is a couple of things for sure. I think the employers have clearly recognized that there was a myth that if you let people work from home in India, one, it's not possible, it's not feasible because of economic strata, smaller homes, etc. That myth has been completely blown away. There was a second myth that productivity will not be good. In fact, what we have seen is significantly uptick in the productivity as people have gone to work from home. Now, the question remains, is it sustainable over the long periods of time? That I don't think we have the answer. The third is also true that offices are not going to go away permanently. There will be anomalies and exceptional companies on both sides of the spectrum who may completely come back to office and some who will completely eliminate their offices. But I think, Varun, the office will become, in my view, in the future, a place of collaboration and a community place, right? So the workplace and the work allocation and the work outputs will get configured around the individual, not around the offices. Today, if you go back to pre-COVID, a lot of the life was structured around the office. Your whole schedule was getting up in the morning, catching the shuttle, coming to the office, going into meetings, conference rooms, collaborations, then again catching a shuttle, going back home. I think that is going to get shifted around those three dimensions of self, sync, and serve, right? So that's definitely coming. Hybrid models, I think for the first time, the power has shifted to the associates. They are demanding, they will want, flexible options. I think employers will provide the flexible options with some guardrails as well, because you asked a very good question in the second part, which is what happens to culture? Culture is very unique and contextual to every organization. And that's the third piece I talk about, which is the serve. You're serving a larger purpose, serving a larger North Star, a larger culture, a larger, group that you come together. There's a lot of power in that as well. And that cannot be 100% done, at least not for the next 5, 8, 10 years, virtually and digitally. Maybe the next generation becomes much more adept at it because they grow up in that. So I think we're going to see a combination of both, a hybrid model. From an HR tech perspective, there is quite a few opportunities emerging in those areas, right? One of the things that we, for example, always in pre-COVID, we didn't pay as much attention to was enablement of associates on day one. So if somebody is joining you 5,000 kilometers away, how do you make that experience seamless and a world-class experience when they join you on the first day? And now we have we've done a lot of work to enable what is called as day zero program. So on day zero, even a day before the associate joins, everything is set up and the associate has a whole package, just landing at their doorstep that they can just turn it on and they're completely enabled across the enterprise. And I think that's something we have worked through. And I think the pandemic has actually forced us to do that transformation. But that's not enough. As the associate comes into the organization, how do you make sure that they actually understand the culture? How do you assimilate them? Now, there is a lot more room for technology to be built. There are white spaces. We haven't figured out all the solutions. We're trying to think that out. I'll give you another simple example. When you have associates coming into the office, how do you dynamically reconfigure seating spaces, not moving the furniture around because that's going to be very expensive for anybody. But if you want 3 feet of distancing, can you just do a few clicks on a map of the floor and the software tells you the output? Or now you want 9 feet of distancing for whatever reason, or you want to partition it in a different way. I think there are opportunities there where startups can come in and say, hey, we can solve these problems for you using SaaS software, planograms. I mean, this has been done in the retail industry. I think it has to come into the HR industry to some ways. So there is quite a few opportunities emerging, Varun. At least we are trying to solve for that. We are spanning the market, but we are not finding solutions yet.
Thank you. Sunitha, I guess I'll go back to you since now we've heard a little bit on the enterprise side, right? And more specifically to the blue and gray collar side. I guess, especially in the blue and gray collar side, there are two parts of the problem, right? There's the sourcing and the retention, and operations, I guess, is just common to both of them. But retention seems to be a big deal in the blue and gray collar space. And a lot of startups, at least that I have seen and come across, seem to be more focused on the sourcing and staffing side of the world and very little on the retention side. And why do you think that is? Do you see that changing? Is the job design just is it just a function of job design and it's a very hard problem for startups to solve, or do you think there's some innovation happening that could come up with interesting solutions?
No, you point out a very valid problem. As in day in and day out, I think if you were to ask Swiggy or Ola, they're all thinking, how do I reduce my churn from 95% or something. So basically an employee who joins in Jan is not there by June, and pretty much the entire workforce needs to be replaced. And that is just the reality of the matter. We're thinking, and that's also driven by the fact that we're thinking of them of just as warm bodies. So I think that there is a fundamental change that needs to come from that point of view as well. But the reason why most startups have been focusing on sourcing is because that by itself is a large problem. How do you tap into the right workforce at the right point of time, whether it could be for warehousing, whether it could be for logistics, cab drivers, and so on? How do you even tap into that workforce, ensure that the background verification is done, the person who shows up is actually the person whom you interviewed or you actually chose to hire? So there is a lot of issues over there, which is what people are focusing on, and rightly so. But what one will realize in the second phase of the gig workers, or the third phase, as I call it, is basically that gig workers need to be treated in an entire community-led approach. It will not be sufficient to think of them as siloed. Okay, you work for Swiggy today, you work for Ola tomorrow, and I don't really care what happens afterwards. So the community-led approach, where each gig worker is able to resonate with his peers, is able to actually give leads, is actually able to show a career path that today, okay, I probably started as a barista at a coffee day, but tomorrow I'm actually the floor manager, and then I can see myself going to become a manager, managing a bunch of such smaller stores and so on. So I think that entire aspiration, that community needs to get created, and that is not going to be possible if you're still thinking of them from the offline perspective. You need to be able to build a digital lit framework right from training. So you identify that person X may not possibly be suitable to sell Apple phones, but he has the skills to sell Oppo phones or so on. And therefore, you build this profile for him saying that, okay, why don't you do this for a year? And after a year, you'll have enough skills. And I see that you have a pathway to then becoming an Apple resale network or whatever of that sort. So basically, that entire mapping of their profile, ensuring that they're given the interventions and the training at the right point of time is very critical. And there are startups, and we can touch upon it later on. One of our startups that we've invested in, GigForce, is trying to take that entire approach. So digital training, intervention at the right point of time, ensuring that you can show them a pathway to a job which is better than just what you're doing at this doing today.
Got it. I think in the West, I also just to follow on, there have been more industry-specific platforms that have come in, right? That are just focused on oil and gas, for example, that go from sourcing to training, and then as a result, retention has generally been better. Do you see that happening here as well?
I think it's also the maturity of the industry. We'll probably see a lot more horizontal-led approach. And then there's going to be spin-offs where people realize that, wow, why do the entire logistics space by itself is just so difficult and complex to tackle and large enough. So let me have warehousing-led solutions because there are nuances specific to that industry that need to be solved. And then you probably have garments-led solution, as in textiles and garments by itself can have a huge opportunity over there. So I think in the near term, it's going to be largely horizontal, and then people, as the maturity obviously increases in the market, there may be a lot more vertical specific solutions.
Awesome. I just have I guess, last question, because we're running out of time before we have a small rapid fire round and then closing thoughts. So Sateesh, I'll go to you. You spoke about the fact of investing in companies that are building for India, right, from a SaaS perspective. But also, if you read about a lot of what investors in the West are talking about, they're talking about taking advantage of the cost structures in India to build for the West as well, right? So do you see that happening in the HR tech industry specifically? And I guess if it were to happen, what do you think are some of the key areas that companies need to focus on or really excel at to be able to build large, scalable global platforms?
Yeah, so Varun, I think, when I said it's not India entrepreneurs just building for India, I said India entrepreneurs building for the region, which includes Southeast Asia or West Asia, or Indian entrepreneurs building for globe that includes Europe and US. When you have to build for US and Europe, I know we have huge success stories within our startup ecosystem and the SaaS domain, but when you go into certain functional domains, like an ERP or human capital management or procurement, I mean, it's very important to know how the process works, how the people process technology works in each of those regions, to be able to successfully kind of gain market share. But also, it's not about you have the low cost of R&D here, that's only one component, as we all know, right? In the business model, eventually, there's a lot of money that's spent on sales and distribution and customer implementations as well as customer success. So I think any entrepreneur building for the global, markets out there they have to do their homework, very carefully. But building for regional markets is a bit easy compared to going after the global markets. But if I were to kind of, talk about few opportunities, that would interest us and where we see, decent sized companies kind of getting built, I think certainly data-driven, performance management or data-driven learning and development or even employee engagement. A lot of times all these things have just been kind of one size fits all. There's no personalization, and as because it's a remote workforce, because it is a digital workplace, how well can you deliver personalized solutions is going to be very important. Definitely intelligent recruitment, that's going to play a big role. I mean, it's not enough just to source, but how well can you screen, filter, transact, and close is going to become very, very important. Not just the discovery, but how do you integrate interview process and even structured recruitment process. That's going to be very important. And kind of last thing is the work-life balancing. It's become more important than ever before. So folks, that are going to bring in solutions in that space, again, we feel there's a big opportunity.
Awesome. That was very useful. Thank you. I'm going to quickly jump into rapid fire. I have 4 questions, and I'll go around based on how you're on my screen. So I'll call out your name and you can quickly answer that. So the first question, I'll start with Arshad and then Sateesh and maybe then Sunitha, right? I guess the first question is a startup outside your portfolio that you're extremely excited about.
Startup outside our portfolio, I'll say Darwin Box.
Awesome. Sateesh?
I think, there are several, but some of the ones that kind of come to my mind are like Visa, as well as like Lena.ai. These are some of the guys that I like what they're trying to do.
Awesome. Sunitha?
I did realize that coming in last meant that I'm going to be sounding like I'm just parroting someone else's answer. But yeah, Lena.ai would be something that would have been good to have had. Yeah.
Awesome. So next question, I'll start with you maybe. Remote work, fad or future?
It is a future. Obviously, there's nuances to it, but it is surely the future. Yeah.
Satish?
I think it has to be a blended approach. I don't think it's going to be entirely remote work. Maybe for a very small subset that may be possible, but it's going to be a very blended approach.
Arshad?
For the masses, I think it's going to be a hybrid. I mean, there might be some professions that could be completely remote, but again, it's a blend. I think it's going to be a hybrid.
Sateesh, I'll start with you on this one. The biggest company in HR tech that you expect to come out in India in the next 5 to 10 years?
Obviously, I expect Darwin Box to be the gorilla. Yeah.
Sunitha?
Completely biased, Better Place.
And Arshad?
I don't have a view on this. There are many companies that are emerging, I think, and we may not even know of something that's maybe starting off in this era that might become much bigger than this. So there is tremendous opportunity, Varun.
Okay, cool. And the last question, I guess, and Arshad, I'll start with you. The largest untapped opportunity in the HR tech space currently, in your view?
I think everything around the self-domain, whether it's wellness, community, collaboration, productivity, enablement for an associate, with the workforce scale and size we have in India, that is a massive opportunity.
Sateesh?
Yeah, Varun, while I talked earlier about recruitment, intelligent recruitment and data-driven insights and work-life balancing, I feel that, to really build a fairly large company outside of, personal management, which is what, HR tech addresses, if you were, effective in both on the health and the financial well-being as well, I think you would build a very, very large company.
Awesome. Sunitha?
Again, it would kind of loop in with some of the answers that I was speaking about earlier. But I think the entire human cycle life management for blue collars and gray collars, you need very specific solutions. Not many of those have actually come up as yet. And there is a large market where you can monetize and scale up quite rapidly. And these can be ported to other Southeast Asian countries and so on. So there can be some great companies that can be built out from India.
Awesome. Thank you. That is all I had. I'll just go around the room, and if any of you have any closing thoughts or final comments that you want to make before we wrap up.
No, Varun, I would like to hear your answers for those 4 questions.
I'm probably not the best place to answer these questions, but I'll try. A startup outside your portfolio, I'm going to borrow answers, but I'm going to say Better Place and Darwinbox. Both are quite excited, and I think that's the same answer in terms of
safe answer, Varun.
Yeah. It's also, I guess that also be the answer to my question on the biggest company. I have a lot of friends who work at Darwinbox, by the way, so I'm exceptionally more biased than most people. Remote work, fad or future, I think, again, I think the blended approach, I think going back to office for a few days and then coming away and focusing on the self, I think that's what will happen. And the largest untapped opportunity, I think, so I haven't spent much time on the SaaS side of the world, but I can tell you that from the blue collar, gray collar side, I think just that whole life cycle management, which I think there's so much unorganized labor workforce in this country that, and we have to get a better way of organizing them if we have to move lots of people up to the middle class. And I think employment will be one of the ways to do that. So yeah, hopefully we see a lot of large companies emerging in that space. Yeah. That's it for me. Anything else? Any comments that you'll had that you'd like to make?
No, I just want to say it's a very seminal topic, very contemporary. Thank you for pulling it together for both Economic Times, HR World, and Varun for being a great host as well. And thank you, Sateesh and Sunitha. I think it's a great opportunity over the next 2 to 3 years. There are so many new spaces that have emerged, and we wish the best of luck to all the startups going after this particular dimension. I'm sure we're going to see a lot more exciting times ahead.
Likewise, thanks for the opportunity. I think, Varun, I think you're wonderful. Learned so much from Arshad and Sunitha. Appreciate the opportunity. Thanks to ETHR World. Yeah.
Absolutely. Very similar thoughts. Thank you for having me here, and great to be on a panel, and great stuff, Varun. Thanks for getting in all these insights from everybody's. That was cool.
So I'd like to say thank you to the 3 of you, and obviously ETHR World. I think I should do this more often. I'm walking away much smarter. So just get on panels with 3 really smart people, and it's like a crash course in that sector. So thank you so much. And I really appreciate your time, effort, and the insights that you shared. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for a healthy and precise discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, would like to know your experience and feedback, so don't forget to fill the event survey form. This will help us in making our events better and seamless.